This is Talk It Out, the Women's Agenda podcast. Tune in for your weekly download on the latest news, trends and ideas affecting your career or your business. Here's your host, Angela Priestley.
Hello and welcome to another episode of our Women's Agenda podcast, and I'm here in the studio at the Eagle Wave studio with Tarla Lambert from Women's Agenda and Georgie Dent from Women's Agenda, so the three of us all representing today. How are you, Tarla?
I am very well today. It's so nice to be back.
It's quite novel to be physically together, isn't it?
I know, we all work
I know, and
virtually.
not in a wine bar. It's unprecedented.
That never happens.
That never happens. You're not inviting me to the wine bar, obviously.
Yes, we'll have to do a little bit more of that maybe Friday afternoons before school pickup, so early wine drinking, why not? So today we're talking about three topics on our little podcast for the next half hour or so, really about game changers for women at work. And we say this in a week when we've had a little bit of more positive news on this front. So a few good examples, including the Sexual Harassment National Inquiry, which has just been announced today, and also just a small example, paid paternity leave that came from Medibank, which we thought was a really good example of an organisation doing something quite different, so offering 14 weeks to all parents, regardless of whether they are the primary or the secondary carer, regardless of whether they are the mother or the father, it doesn't matter, they all get 14 weeks paid leave. So a couple of positive examples in otherwise it hasn't been the best few weeks for women, so hopefully we can go for something a little bit more upbeat this time. But Georgie, I wanted to start with the National Inquiry into Workplace Sexual Harassment that has been announced today. So Kate Jenkins will lead it. The federal government has put up half the cost of it as well. What do you see as being some of the outcomes out of that inquiry?
Well, I mean, what the specific outcomes are going to be will hopefully come in the shape of recommendations for reform that will make this less of an issue. I mean, that's a very ambitious target, but I think it's doable, and I think that this announcement, I mean, I was reflecting on it this morning. Even a year ago, I just cannot imagine that something like this would have been tabled and considered, let alone being tabled and considered by, I mean, I think the Human Rights Commission and the Minister for Women, so Kate Jenkins and Kelly O'Dwyer, have worked together on this to say that actually, do you know what, not only has Me Too revealed that this is an incredibly prevalent problem in workplaces, but it's also an economic issue. And I mean, that was the comment that I spoke to Kelly O'Dwyer about it, and she said to me, you know, we have to start looking at this. It is an issue that affects women's financial security, because inevitably when harassment happens, and I mean, Ange, we've had this with guests in here before when they've spoken about their own experiences, it tends to be the female who leaves, you know, after something's happened, or if they stay, they get demoted, they get looked beyond. If they do leave under, you know, less than perfect circumstances, they might not get a reference for the next job. And all of those things sort of combine to create a, you know, that is an adverse economic impact, and I don't think that's been looked at before.
And it's an impact on the woman, but also the business as well, which I think is where it could be really powerful, is to put some numbers around what it actually means for those businesses. So those staff who leave because of sexual harassment, or staff who stay and just are not particularly happy and don't feel like they can be productive or be their best selves at work because of that, that's the sort of thing we don't see numbers on, and I feel that could get businesses to really step up and shift their game on. Yeah,
I think the other thing is, I mean, the Human Rights Commission here, obviously it's sort of an understatement to say that it's had a difficult few years. I think it really has, but the reality is it's actually really well positioned to run this sort of inquiry, because we have had this legislation about sexual discrimination and harassment for a long time. We do actually have quite a lot of data. We've got people in that team that know this area back to front, and I think all of those things make it really significant that this is actually happening and that it is being led by Kate Jenkins, who I think is quite universal. I mean, I'm yet to find someone who doesn't speak admirably of Kate Jenkins, and I think having her head it, as someone who has been a lawyer, has worked as the Sex Discrimination Commissioner in Victoria before taking on the federal position, I think that she's an incredibly credible person to lead this.
And she's also shared her own experiences just today, that she has experienced sexual harassment, which I know we saw that with Liz Broderick as well at the time, and just getting those stories out there can be really powerful. Tarla, what do you think? Do you think this is a game changer? You've got your cynical face on.
I think that's just my universal face. Look, if it's not a tangible game changer, I think it's at least a symbolic one. I think it's really nice to be moving away from the idea that Me Too was only ever going to be a hashtag and nothing more. I think that this proves that there is a force behind it. I guess my small my cynicism comes from thinking that maybe there's not enough going into it. I mean, the government's committed $500,000, which, as I remarked to Ange earlier, wouldn't buy you a studio apartment in Sydney right now, and is about, I think Malcolm Turnbull's house is worth $70 million. So just to put it into context, but...
Well, we could always put it into context against the school chaplaincy program, which I like to bring up regularly. So.
Oh, yeah, that's my favourite.
Yep. And how many millions went to that?
Which is also an issue, considering that the public school that my kids go to, we got an email this week asking for volunteers for parents to teach ethics classes. And one of the other parents very cleverly replied and said, do you think that it might be possible for there to be some funding for this program, considering this much goes into school chaplaincy? It is quite ridiculous, but that's a complete
in a secular
tangent.
country as well.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
a good tip for some other parents out there who might be thinking about questioning it. Yes.
Yeah.
Can we pay these volunteers, given they're our counterparts?
Or even employ people to teach that in the same way that religious leaders are employed to teach. Anyway, that's another issue.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, it's not a huge amount of money, that's for sure.
And I think it's encouraging. As I said to you, I think it's a symbolic, encouraging step in the right direction, and it's also probably the first time that this government has, specified anything around this issue, which I think is important. But I think time will tell how far it can go and what outcomes can actually be derived from it.
I think the other thing that I was recalling today, maybe because I'm a sadist, but I was thinking about in the 2013 election campaign when Tony Abbott, who was then the sort of candidate for Prime Minister, well, he wasn't actually, it was before he was elected and appointed himself as the Minister for Women.
Oh, it was before that.
But he, when he stood with the Liberal MP Fiona Scott, and said, I think I can say, she's got a bit of sex appeal. And I thought, look, today is a day where I take stock, and I think that was not that long ago that was the man who very quickly after that became our Prime Minister. And at that point, that comment, a lot of us were expected to sort of say, there's nothing wrong with that. That's just harmless. And we all know sexual harassment is obviously on a scale, and that is at one end of the scale. But it's symbolic of a problem when the leader, effectively her employer, felt comfortable commenting on her sex appeal in a public forum.
And the person going for the top job in Australia is doing that nonetheless. So.
And I mean, she, at the time, I think it's really... it's sad because at the time, obviously, she wasn't able to speak out against it. She has, in the years since then, come out and said it made her incredibly uncomfortable. But she wasn't in a position. She was relatively powerless. And so we were all expected to swallow this line that somehow, the Prime Minister to be talking like that is not a problem. So...
And I think it's across the board as well. I mean, obviously we're talking about politics, but I wrote a piece last week around, the meaning of the NRL Women's Premiership that's coming up, and I was reflecting on the culture of the NRL to date, and one that's been quite pervasively damaging. And there was one issue in particular that I recalled around a player who had glassed his girlfriend. I mean, we're talking about assault here, so this is, a different ballpark. But I was looking at the comments that had been made about him after that, and while he was going through court proceedings, and his coach coming out and saying he was a soft bloke and he was very likeable, and really excusing this behaviour or relegating it to the sideline under the guise that he was actually a decent guy. And I just don't think that would happen anymore. And that was really encouraging, because I think that was 2009 that happened, and I do feel like we've come so far from that point. So I think there is change afoot. Whether or not this is going to create a huge wave. I'm not sure, but I think it's, part of a bigger picture.
Yeah. So small buckets of money, but symbolic change, and we're already seeing, and I can't imagine a comment like that coming from this is someone running for Prime Minister again.
No.
And
I also think this might change, but I also haven't seen anything today where we've had anyone stand up and sort of make a mockery of this inquiry. I haven't seen anyone suggest that it's not necessary, which again I think is a small victory, because I think that in times gone by that would have definitely happened. And I think...
Well, that could still happen.
It could.
So we're only a few hours in, so... But, I mean, it has...
Hold this space.
We'll wait and see on that one. But I can think of a few potential crossbenchers who could have something to say.
I'm waiting. They're so...
Undoubtedly, yeah.
I think the ABC is occupying their minds currently.
Yeah.
All eyes on Mark Latham as well.
Yeah. So moving on to another issue, which I'm sure certain people would have plenty to say about as well. But I wanted to talk about... so this website called Direct Advice for Dads, which I also found encouraging. I didn't know about it. I've come across it this week, and they put out this great survey and great research looking at 500 of Australia's largest organisations and looking at them according to how they treat fathers. And they had a number of metrics according to that. They said, well, if you're going to meet our criteria of being a good place for dads, then we want to see that you're offering at least 2 weeks paid parental leave to fathers or secondary carers, that you can take that at any point within the first 12 months of the child's life, that you're offering flexible work and a couple of other things as well. And then they came up with 44 that they found matched that criteria, and then a list of, I think it was 20 that they then ranked as the top 20. Now, coming up on top of that was Medibank, which I'll just lightly add is also one of the very few boards on the ASX that happens to be majority female. So coming up first was Medibank, because they are offering 14 weeks paid leave to all parents. So not just to primary carers, to secondary carers as well. Which the next top was Mirvac, and they're offering 4 weeks to secondary carers. So they are well ahead of the pack here. So, and I just found that really encouraging, given it's sort of just shifting the balance a little bit, and it's saying, hey, can we look at what we can offer fathers here? The other thing that was interesting about that policy is that you can take it in up to 2 blocks at any point in the first 2 years. So if you're not able to take it maybe when your partner's off, you can take it later. You could take it 7 weeks, and then 7 weeks, 12 months later, whatever it is. Georgie, you reacted to that story as well. What did you see it as something that we could potentially see other organisations following as well, or are they just too far ahead of the pack?
I mean, I hope so. I think it probably will. We do know that in this space, what competitors do, other people follow. That happened with paid parental leave in the first place when it was introduced. And so I think this is partly why it's a really good thing to have a study like this and to publicise these findings, because it is... look, maybe we overuse the term game changer, but to me, when I think about that...
I've used it a lot in this podcast alone, so that's why you're laughing at me when I started out in my intro with it.
But if I think about the way that sets up a family, if you think about the first year of a baby's life, as it stands, and we know this is borne out through statistics, very, very few dads in Australia take very much longer than 2 weeks leave. In often cases, that's unpaid leave, but that's the most a lot of dads take.
And we've seen that very few actually taking the government paid leave. They're entitled to.
I know.
Just not getting around to. I don't know what it is.
But I think it goes to this cultural expectation that when the baby arrives, the dad will just be, in some houses, the sort of supplementary person who just in those first 2 weeks will be there to help out the mum, and then they'll go back to work and keep earning the money, and then from then on the mum's in charge of the baby. And then we see that pattern continues, because then when the mum does go back to work, it tends to be part-time, and it's part-time probably because if she's paying childcare, then it's basically not tax effective for her to work beyond 2 or 3 days a week. There's all those different reasons, whereas I look at this 14 weeks and I think it's not just giving a family 14 weeks of financial breathing space, which is considerable, but it's also setting up the expectation that caring is something that both parents do, 2 parents. It doesn't matter whether you're the primary parent or the secondary parent. And then I think that sets a precedent that follows positively for the family, in that it's not just a first year of life thing, but I think if a parent has 14 weeks off at some point with an infant in the first year of their life, it's very likely that they're going to be fairly engaged in that in the caregiving of that child forever on. Because it's not ring-marked as women's work or I don't know how to settle the baby. I mean, the only way you learn to settle a baby is by settling a baby. And I'm 3 kids in and I'm still having trouble with one of them at the moment. So, it's not...
She hasn't slept.
It's not a perfect science.
This is a commercial break for Work It Out. We'll be back in a moment. But if you're interested in being a sponsor for Work It Out or Women's Agenda, just drop us a line and let us know. That's womensagenda.com.au.
I still remember the day that my partner went back to work after he took his 2 weeks leave, and I still didn't know what to do. Our first baby, and I ended up in tears within about 2 hours, and I got him back home again because, I mean, if there's one thing to want that support, but also it's just the fact that, like you say, it's when you learn a lot of the behaviours of the things you need to do. It's kind of when you start taking on the mental load just because you're there, and you start doing the domestic stuff because you're there. And I think that if you can get a second parent involved in that from the outset, that it's going to have really positive outcomes for years to come. And it gives fathers an opportunity to spend more time with their children, which is great, and mothers potentially opportunity to return to work.
Yeah, and the opportunity to sort of not drown and not take everything on. We were talking last week a lot about self-care, and that stuff is not just a sort of luxury issue. And my feeling is very much that when both parents are engaged, it does give women breathing space to look after themselves, whether that is to focus on their career, whether it's to focus on going to the gym, or whether it's just lying down watching something fun on Netflix because they haven't had an hour off, all week. And so I think bravo Medibank, and I think I hadn't actually contemplated that Medibank was, I think they were the first ASX 200 company to have a majority female board.
Yeah, I think that Fortescue may have been the second. And that was only in the last 6 months or so. And it wasn't that long ago that they didn't have any women, the Fortescue board. So it's amazing how quickly things can change. Tarla, any thoughts on that story around?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you. I think it just levels the playing field and really allows, all parents. I think the idea with that is that it actually removes the labels of being a primary carer or a secondary carer. We don't need to think in terms like that. I also don't know that I subscribe to the idea that one parent is innately better than another parent. And I think it is a conversation that we need to be having around, who will stay at home with the kids. And I think policies like this make that a more likely thing to happen. For me, I mean, I don't have kids yet, but I always think about the situation. I always think about what it'll be like. I love children, but I look at my partner and I know that he will be a far better hands-on parent than I will be. So at that time, will we assess and go, should you be the primary carer? And I think we will, and I just think that this is opening, policies like this open the door for more people to consider that possibility.
So could I just say then, do you want to think about your husband, I'm sorry, he's not even your husband, but your partner applying for a job at Medibank? Because my
a good point,
my child rearing is done. We're not having any more kids. But yesterday after reading that, and my husband doesn't even work in a field that Medibank would ever want, but I was like, I wonder how he could get a job there so we could have another baby and it would be fun. Yeah. So, but you could perhaps live that for me and I'll vicariously
There you go. You can let him know that.
I mean, I think it's a bit of a tenuous link at the moment because, given he's a soccer coach come teacher's aide, but we'll work it out. I'm sure we can come up with something.
Everyone needs soccer coaches. The World Cup's on right now. They're going to be inspired. They'll be after their own.
I suspect Medibank will have a sort of
if
a flurry of job applications.
That is going to have a soccer coach, I think it's Medibank. I mean, I'm sure they've probably got some great wellbeing policies as well. I don't know. We will talk to them we'll find out more about what they do there because I know they're doing fun stuff. And so Kylie Bishop, who's the head of people and culture, I saw some of her quotes on that policy, and she did mention the fact that they wanted to intentionally take out mothers and fathers and secondary carers, and they just wanted to call people parents. If you have a child, mother, father, you're the parent, so everyone gets treated equally in that sense. So our final game changer, or I could say circuit breaker, or there's so many terms we could use here, but female CEOs. So this comes off a story that Tarla has written that I really enjoyed, which is around the best CEOs for women, and it comes off a list from Comparably, where they found the list of the 50 best CEOs across the Fortune 500, a popular sourced list, so you can't really blame the people who came up with the list necessarily, but they came up with 50 best CEOs for women, and just 4 of those CEOs were female. So, Tarla, my question, as we spoke about in our editorial meeting, do you have to be a woman to be a good CEO for women, or should you? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, look, my cynicism got a good workout this morning, I tell you. But no, I don't necessarily think you need to be a female CEO, like a female CEO, to be a good CEO for women. But I think there were just so many gaping holes with this report or this ranking. One of them was that no company-wide policies were looked at, and so the respondents weren't asked about any policies or initiatives for women in their company that would have any impact on them. Parental leave, mentorship, leadership pathways. All of these were deemed to be more about the company rather than the leader. What I found really problematic with that is that surely without the leader, the company is just an inanimate object.
Yes.
That baffled me. And also, it just seemed so arbitrary. I mean, like the number one CEO was the CEO of Costco, which I think has had a number of pretty big cultural issues in the past. And also, I don't know how these women were asked to take this survey. Were they influenced? Were they bribed? What was... I just feel like there were a few different issues. I will say that, I think that these leaders, by all accounts, are valued as a leader, and that's really good. But I think that female leaders are really important as well, and we don't have enough of them, and this is a huge problem. Because I believe that, female CEOs understand the innate challenges that women face, probably more readily than any man could. And I think that there are, a number of these challenges that prevail. So I think that we need to have at least half of these CEOs being the best CEOs for women, because I tend to think that they just will understand what is important for families, for women.
You think for their staff as well. I mean, plenty of those female staff would maybe want to see somebody at the top. It does change how you might think about your path to actually get there in the first place. If you can see someone, and if they've had children, if they haven't, whatever it is, but if you see someone who might share at least a few similarities to where you're going in life, surely that would help in terms of being a great CEO for you. Yeah.
I think in that piece I said, when I think about the best female leaders, these aren't business leaders, but for me as a woman, when I think about the best leaders, I think of, Malala and Michelle and Hillary and Julia and Indira and Margaret, and not all these women are women that I share, ideologies with, but I respect them and I look up to them because they were women that managed to push through ranks that are very hard to. And I think that is needed in business as well. Women that are in aspiring leaders need to be able to see female CEOs and female board directors ahead of them.
What do you think, Georgie?
Yeah, my issue with this sort of thing is that it just perpetuates the notion of what makes a leader, and it just, surprise, surprise, it's a man. And I think that's why it is really important to challenge that. I think that I sort of shy away from the idea that, female CEOs are in and of themselves brilliant, because I think the idea is that there should be female CEOs who are brilliant and female CEOs who are terrible, in the way that there are male leaders who are terrible and brilliant. So I think that I'm reluctant to sort of speak about, to sort of glorify female CEOs, because I think they already have got so much pressure on them. I think we've seen that time and time again. I mean, you think about the, Catherine Brenner experience, that's not a CEO, but as a chair, as a female leader, because you are in such a tiny minority, the pressure that's on you.
And you can be the all-woman example.
You are the whole problem. And I think that is in part because as soon as you see a female leader, you know that they are in the minority. And so it just feeds into this subconscious thing. And I mean, it's not necessarily malicious, but I just think, a lot of people have this idea about what it takes to be a good leader, and it is what they've seen reflected time and time again, which is male, middle-aged men.
Yeah, and interestingly, and Tarla, you had this a couple of those examples in your piece, but when a female CEO does something, so the Energy Australia example with Catherine Tanner, who leads that and managed to close the gender pay gap and overnight, basically, around International Women's Day this year by announcing a fund that would pretty much even it up across the whole company. And you look at something like that and people don't look at her and say, well, all female CEOs will close gender pay gaps. Whereas if it's a negative experience, that's when we start to have these... of course, all female CEOs are unqualified, or all female board directors or whatever is out there wreaking havoc on corporate Australia. But we don't necessarily look at some of the positive examples of things that happen and try to apply that across the entire gender, which you can't, because that's not how it works.
We give them all of the negatives of the doubt with none of the benefit of, hope or optimism.
Yes. And that might bring us, that's our final game changer, circuit breaker, whatever you want to call it, for this week. Hopefully we'll have some really fresh examples for next week as well. But I will just end on a recommendation, something you're reading, watching, talking about this week.
Okay.
Georgie. She's...
well, you were looking at me. I thought you were going to go to me first.
Jumped ahead.
Okay, so the 3-part series recently from Four Corners, Sarah Ferguson's report
I haven't watched
into
it.
Russia, US, Trump. Now, I cannot recommend it highly enough. I watched all 3 episodes on Catch Up, and I would say that I'm fairly well read and I kind of keep generally across what's happening, but it is a very, very compelling picture of exactly all of this stuff that of how Trump has been embroiled in Russia and his presidency. And she has interviewed, the access that she's had, it is absolutely unbelievable. It's sort of hard to believe that it's an Australian production. I suspect that it will be bought and shown in England and America. It's very well worth your time.
I watched sorry, just to add to that, but I just watched the documentary about Trump on Netflix as a young Trump.
Oh yes, I haven't seen that either.
It was
so much viewing to do.
It was quite insightful.
It is quite. I mean, in the Four Corners, there is also quite a lot of footage of him from being a young man, and he's really quite terrifying.
I think he always has been. I think that's what I got out of it. Really.
So Tarla.
Yeah, look, mine's really old. I'm sure people will definitely think that, but I've been watching Luther for the first time, and I've just gotten through the last series, and I am so obsessed. And I also am incredibly excited because they're launching a new series later in the year, and Idris Elba is just my dream man.
Should have been Bond. He should have played Bond.
He absolutely
maybe next time.
should have.
He also went to the royal wedding. So.
Well, mine is a book. It's called Live, Work, Die. I know I've got your attention now.
Okay, I'm depressed.
I'm only about halfway through, but it's by Corey Payne, a journey into... I've got to get back to it. Basically a journey into Silicon Valley, the heart of Silicon Valley. And it's, I just like it. It's a bit of a, it's obviously with a title like that, it's, you can see where it's going, but it's a bit of a cynical take on Silicon Valley and what's going on there. And basically this Corey goes in there with the idea that he's going to become a billionaire. He's a white male. What could possibly be standing against him? And it's quite funny how he goes to... and just looking at the property prices, how difficult it actually is to live there and stay there, and how swamped it is with apparently genius ideas, and he's in the process of developing his great idea to try and get investors. His idea is actually pretty bad. I don't know if he will be successful, but good fun read, and a bit of a different take on Silicon Valley compared to what we're usually and often fed. So that is us for the week. Thank you, Tarla. Thank you, Georgie.
Thank
Thank
you. It
you
was
to
good to
Eagle
chat.
Wave Studio once again. And a reminder that we do put a newsletter out every day, and you can go to our website and you can subscribe. It's free. We are a 100% female-owned independent media organisation, and we really enjoy and love what we do. So if you want to subscribe to that, you can just go to our website.
That's a wrap for Talk It Out, the Women's Agenda podcast, powered by Eagle Waves Radio. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and jump on the website for more amazing shows. Catch you next time.